You want to give me a countdown?
5.
Oh, yes.
I already started filming.
All right.
4.
All right, so we're going to start with the scene where Yvonne is meeting up with her sisters-in-law, and we see basically in this scene that she's a very id-dominant, like impulse-driven person where she's become obsessed with material goods and satisfying her pleasure principle, because we see that she smokes a lot more than she likes to, she says, which means that she's just doing it out of boredom. She has like 18-carat earrings, which are like super expensive because she has the money now, so she finds pleasure in that. And then we also see that she has a lot of repression of her old life. Like Julia said, it's like she wants to put it behind her, and that's it, that's all. But what ends up happening is that when she ends up drinking with her sisters-in-law, she lets that all out immediately and then becomes super angry and then ends up crashing her car on the way home. So it's like all the repression is like a wall that she's built up, but as soon as there's a tiny chip in the wall, which there was at that moment, it all comes flooding out uncontrollably. We also see that she's projecting a lot, so she's sad and angry, unfulfilled, and she projects that onto her sisters-in-law by saying like, oh yeah, like she even says that oh yeah, they're so full of themselves, and then later on when she's in her car, she's like, I'm so full of myself. So she's like consciously projecting, but she doesn't realize. And then we see there's no, for Niko, when he hears of the accident, there's no superego, there's no guilt or shame or like anything, like no emotions for Yvonne. She just says like, oh yeah, she's been in an accident. He's like, I'm still at school, can you pick me up? Like he has no emotional response at all to Yvonne being in an accident. He doesn't ask how serious it is. It's just like, that's that. Boom, moving on. And then we see that Niko is also at like an extreme state of repression where he just doesn't act or feel any emotions between his entire life. Like he just lives every day by day. So when he's in a situation where he has to interact with anybody, he just blocks them off and then shuts off like their communication. So in this, he takes his anger out on Yvonne and Sammy and blames them, like all the problems that are really cool. He really he blames them for all his problems, and like he especially hates Sammy, who's the father figure in this situation. He just says, I hate you, and then that could be projection as well, where he doesn't like himself at all because he might still blame himself for his mother's death, all that in the past, because that's never been a resolved situation. Niko uses his room to isolate himself. That's not really isolation, but it just it shows that he has more of a feminine side. He has more of a masculine side. He never releases any emotions. He just like does it more angrily, and that's like, it's said to be like a more masculine reaction to a situation where instead of like, feeling emotional or crying or like, doing whatever, he's like angry, and that's that, like, I hate you, and then he runs and just doesn't release any emotions, and that's I guess feminism. Yeah. Okay, so also for feminism, just a big thing, Yvonne acts as like a classic mother where she prepares all the food. She's most like emotional in the family. She acts as a link that holds the family together. She has a job too, but she cooks all the meals. She takes care of all the men in the family. And she's pretty submissive to Sammy. Like she never conveys an opinion towards him. She just like accepts what's happening. Sammy's more of a masculine presence. He never shows any emotion. He just, as I said before, he's just angry. Same with Niko. And then he's the breadwinner, like one of the sole breadwinners. How he's like, he's offered them like a huge house and lots of qualities that not many people would have access to. And then there's also this part where he hires a spy to track down Niko's dad because he wants to like get to the bottom of this and like make Niko not hate him as much because he wants to resolve that situation. So that shows that he has a little bit of feelings and like sentiment for Niko, and we'll get to that later on why he feels that way. And then there's a situation where Niko's brought to his house and he's all bloodied and beat up and he's being held by a police officer saying like, is he yours? And his instinct is to say no, which means that like even though he wants to hire this detective for Niko and like solve his familial problems, he doesn't actually accept him as part of the family yet because he's just been a huge nuisance and not really like, he never really wanted this to happen. It was all Yvonne's idea. And then we jump to Antoine, who wakes up from a 2-year coma, and he says that he's been having dreams about a pigeon and a lamb and him dancing around or like pacing around a room in an apartment. And I looked up on the totems, and the pigeon totem is find peace in turmoil, purify thoughts, gentle and giving, innocence, difficulty with others. And we can assume to say that the pigeon is Elise. That's Elise's totem. And also relating back to what Julia said earlier, where Elise was like flying away on the raft, that could be that the pigeon totem is like waking up in her or something like that. We also see the lamb totem as renewal, compassion, childlike qualities, vulnerability, innocence, and that's Niko, because that's like the qualities he represents as well. And then we see at a later dream, Antoine is in the middle of the ocean struggling with a huge sea bass, and a fish totem is stretching limits, health, feelings, and unconscious and higher self, which is what Antoine's experiencing, the whole unconsciousness bit. And then when it finally gets away in his dream, and he says, if it gets, then it gets away, he knows it will die. So it's saying that like all those characteristics with the totem relating to him will die if it gets away. So it might be referring to like past memories, or like Niko in general, how like if like he's gonna be led down a dark path or something if he doesn't resolve what he's going through. Next up, the spy finally finds Antoine and where he's residing and tells this to, or he doesn't find him, but he realizes that his ship sank and comes to the conclusion that Antoine is dead. When Sammy hears this, he has no sense of compassion or guilt or anything or shame for himself. Like there's no emotional response. He's like, so he's dead, cool. But that doesn't mean that he has any emotional response for Niko, because he's just saying this. He doesn't care about Antoine himself. He just cares about like resolving the situation with Niko. So there's no emotional response for Sammy, but he goes to tell Niko about his dad. And when Niko's told about this, there's a quote where he says, "The pain he's been waiting to feel begins burning a hole in his head." So that's all like the whole wall of defense mechanisms breaking through finally again, where this finally a situation he's been he said anticipating to feel for this entire time is finally coming. So he can't control it because it's just like this overwhelming feeling of emotion. And then he actually says in a quote, "What did I do that was so wrong?" So we see that he's still in that state of blaming himself for his mother's death, and now he feels that he's also responsible for his father's death. And yeah, that's what his parents told him, that if he's good, he'll get a brother as a friend, and what he got was 2 dead parents and no family. So haha, fun. That's nice. We see that Sammy's pretty ego dominant. All the actions that he does have a purpose, and when he's discussing with Niko about his father's death, he first introduces it as a conversation that they used to have when Niko was younger. How he's like, "You remember when I used to make you grilled cheeses and I talked to you about like how heat is like a whole thing of evolution?" And he like leads that into saying that like maybe you've taken on too much heat, Niko. So it's like all of his actions have a purpose. Like the spy was for Niko. He went to Canada to provide a family. Like all of his actions have a purpose. He's not id driven. So then when Niko's like crying in Sammy's arms, and this brings back memories of Sammy's son Zaid, whatever, about his trauma with his his past son, and that's a whole other thing where Sammy and Zaid, it's back in Beirut, where it's like war torn and numb, where like not really a lot of things affect the people there because it's like it's like a usual event that happens, or like people are like killed by car bombs, and it's like, okay, this happens, it sucks, but we're used to it. And then with this, it's like psychological damage, where it's all the trauma and like where he goes to a hospital where his son was his whole half his body was like blown up by a car bomb, and he's still like conscious because there's no medicine left for him. So he's like screaming as like his arms being cut open and to prevent infection. So this is like the sight and sound of seeing his own son like dying in front of his eyes. Like that stuck with Sammy throughout his entire life and never left him. So that could also be repression, how he never really dealt with the feelings. He just kind of escaped the country to go to Canada and start a new life.
So you know you're at just over 9 minutes.
Oh crap. All right. So some social commentary. Doesn't care about the fortune. Let them boil it down. Oh yeah, so this is about Niko. He starts getting a little bit older and he has no compassion for anybody else. So, or basically nobody else. So he says, let them boil their brown water in peace. So he's referring to like third world countries and how there's like a whole bunch of tragedies happening there, and how like they have to boil like their dirty water to like get their actual water, and he doesn't care about them. So that's just showing how he used to be in that situation himself, but he doesn't actually care about it now that he's in like a more like a, I don't know, like fitting situation for him, like better, easier, whatever. And then he ends up getting into a relationship with a girl named Barbara, and this is a big part because he's never had like a love interest before. He's also never had a motherly connection. So this is all connected to like the Oedipus complex, how like his mother was taken away from him at that prime age, so he never actually got to like solve the Oedipus complex with his mother and father. He just like had it like, I guess, removed from him, so he never actually came to the resolution that like how to deal with like a relationship or like a repression of sexual urges or whatever. So when he finally gets with Barbara, he immediately confesses his love and has no control over the relationship. So he sees it as love, but it's actually just lust. And then she ends up getting pregnant, and yeah. So when he announces this, when Barbara announces this, he says he doesn't know what's going on. He's just talking. So this is like fear overwhelming him, like anxiety, how like he doesn't really understand what's happening. It's just like he's speaking and like kind of out of control. So this could also be neurotic anxiety, where you feel like you're losing control of everything around you. And yeah, cool. And he also sees that the image of Barbara becomes less perfect as he sees her flaws. So like before, it was like Barbara's like a flawless individual, even though she's like 18, she ran away from home, has her own like house, but like a beat up house, and like is doing drugs and working at Zellers. So it's not really a bright future, but he sees it as like a flawless kind of situation until this happens, and he's like, okay, it's not that good. Yeah, and then blah 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 blah, and then there's like all the reinvention motifs. So there's a dream that Niko has about hands, and there's like 17 severed hands on the floor, and he realizes they're all severed hands of his past self. So like 17 years of his life, 17 versions of him, and that could be reinvention. Like his father always told him, like, you know, you have to reinvent yourself. You have to make a new life for you. And this could be like every time he's had like a traumatic situation, he's already reinvented himself. And then there's a lot of rationalization for his thieving, for his like theft and stuff. So he ends up stealing $10,000 from Zellers because he wants to escape all of his problems in Canada and go back to visit his dad. So he rationalizes stealing all this money by, I want to see my dad, or like I can't live here. I have no future. So he does that, and then Antoine, back at his dad, we go back to him, and then he has like a bunch of social commentary. So he says it's all there, but the darker a particular past, the harder the harder time he has remembering it. So this refers to his amnesia and how like the more traumatic a situation is, the harder it is to remember it, and that's just like, you know, we all experience that. If we go through like a horrible event, then we're not gonna want to remember that. So we like push it back. If we push it back far enough, we're not gonna be able to remember it, even if we try. Like sometimes if it's so bad, then our memory just like says, nope, you're not allowed. And then for a religious lens, he also says, God must not want my lineage to grow. And this is when he has twins, but the male twin is strangled by the umbilical cord. So he's like, okay, so I'm only gonna have girls, and God doesn't want my lineage to grow. This is just referring how like he believes that God is in control of his life and whatever. And then there's a thing about how he says how like he finally meets Niko, and then Niko says, I love you, and he's like, I love you too, Niko. But then Niko's like, your love is not good for me. Like you've ruined my life, basically. And then he says sometimes that's just how love is. So he's referring to like, you know, like not, especially with his relationship with Barbara, how it's like, you know, you might experience love, but maybe someone doesn't feel it back, or maybe there's like a situation that isn't good that needs like it's not healthy or something. So maybe love is a thing, but you shouldn't, like, it's not always a healthy feeling of love. And then last page, there's a big piece of social commentary at the end where Sammy says, sometimes a person must bend, sometimes he can't see repercussions, and some decisions are made in moments of spiritual fog. So this is a big social commentary just saying like everyone makes mistakes. It's up to us to bend and ponder how we would change them so we can like improve and live happier. And this is about like, you know, coming to terms with our actions, and it could be about reinvention as well and acceptance on how like if we keep repeating the same mistakes, then it's like it's not going to be good for us. So if we look back and try and reinvent our bad selves, then we can live happier. And that's all I have.